Hey guys, Double Wide 6, and today we're going to show you how to do a valve job on a flathead engine. So by request, a few of you asked me to show how to do a valve job. So there's a lot of videos on YouTube on how to do this, but there's not one for me, so I'll put one up. So I'm working on a small, it's Aaron's little snowblower here. It's a 5-horse, has a Tecumseh engine. And it's a flathead engine, meaning that just simply has standard valves rather than the overhead valves. And if you take a look at this thing, I put a little bit of plastic over the gas cap so gas doesn't leak out. First thing that we're going to do here is loosen up all these head bolts, crack them loose, and remove the gas tank. And we'll pull off the shroud. We got to basically get into the engine. So I counted the bolts on the thing. It's only like 10 bolts, so it wasn't too bad. And I'll take you through and show you all the bolts. So there's like 8 up top, and then there's 2 down on the bottom. They're right down in here. And then on the back side, the only other thing you have to do is there's a little metal plate here with a small screw that you have to take off. This thing has a handle here, so I'm hoping I can get this shroud popped off even with this handle on here. Every snowblower is a little different, but looks like it's coming loose, so I'm just gonna try and wiggle that out of there. So I was able to wiggle the shroud off. This just sits underneath the gas tank. The only thing I noticed about this particular head is that there were 2 shorter bolts in these holes, and these 2 bolts here that I marked, you could see I used some yellow, indicate where the bolts have extensions on them to hold this chute mechanism thing. So otherwise all the other bolts are the same size. The bolts were pretty rusty on this one, which is pretty commonly the case with snowblowers, but nothing broke off. And the head, you know, this is the first time I'm pulling it off. You can see it's nice and loose, and this is actually the original head gasket, which looks to be in really good shape. And I know it's original because the aftermarket ones, they don't have these deep perforations. And when you pull this thing off, you always want to look for any exhaust gases getting through the head gasket, and you can see that's nice and clean. Really, this whole head looks good. Another indication that the rings are in great shape on this thing. So I have the head off, and just a couple things that you want to look for here is this valve here is the intake valve. It's a little bit bigger, and that's generally because the intake valve's sucking in air, so it needs a little bit of a bigger opening. The exhaust valve, I'm trying to wiggle that one, and I can feel it trying to move a little bit, but I can't quite turn it. It's somewhat tight. We know it's leaking because we did a leak down test and checked it in my last video. One of the things that I checked here, I put a 0.001 feeler gauge down in here to check the valve lash, and I couldn't fit that in on the exhaust valve. And I think the clearance on this thing should be like 0.01 for the exhaust valve on these Tecumsehs, and I can fit through. I have a very thin feeler gauge. It's 0.0015. That one will fit in. So that's the thinnest feeler gauge that I have. So it's way off. So we're gonna clean these things up and get them back in. Alright, so to get the valve springs out of here, it's pretty easy to do with a screwdriver. You can just get in here and kind of pry until that little keeper pops out. There you go, we just got that one. And we can do the same with the other one. The other way to do it is to use actually a valve compressor. I'll show you with that thing. So once you get the valve spring loose and the clip on the bottom loose, you can turn over the engine a little bit and just lift the valve out, okay? And this is my valve spring compressor, and you can see I have the valve in there and it's compressed. That way I can pull it out easily. You want to keep track of which spring is which. You don't want to get that mixed up. Sometimes they have different tension, and I don't even know if this Tecumseh has the same exact springs offhand. So I'm just going to take a wire brush to this thing. You want to make sure that you have a soft brush. The one I'm using has brass. I'm leaving the valves in so I don't get dirt down in there, and I got the piston at top dead center. And there's not really too much carbon on this thing anyhow. So when you do a valve job or any type of job on an engine, your main job is to really take a look at all the parts and make sure things are in good working order. And anything that needs to be fixed, you got to fix, otherwise the engine's not going to run right. So we're going to take a look at our valves. Here's a close look at the seat of the exhaust valve. You can kind of see how it's shiny. I haven't cleaned it off yet, but you have that ring going around. But if you look right here, it's kind of dark and burnt, and right there is where it's not, where the gases are actually getting through. So we'll clean that up. And if you look at the intake valve, this one's seating real nice. It's pretty nice and shiny around. This is the head. This needs to be cleaned too. There's really not too much carbon on it. I'm going to wire brush it. An extra step here, I'm just going to make sure that the head's nice and flat. So I have some 320 sandpaper, and I'm just going to put a little bit of oil on the sandpaper and a little bit of oil on the head here. And I'm working on my table saw, which is nice and flat. You could do this on a piece of glass or a piece of granite. The cutout from your sink at your countertop, if you keep those things, those are nice for this type of work. So it doesn't really take too long, and you can see how there's like a nice grain from sanding that. And we'll clean it up, and you can see it looks real nice and shiny. So it's probably a process worth doing. So now we're going to do a little valve lapping, and I'm just going to take my valve lapping tool and push that on there just like that. You want to make sure you get all the oil off that. Stick that thing on there before you get out your valve lapping compound. Alright, so that's on there, and now I'm just using a little valve grinding compound, and we're going to put that right around the seat here. And you'll notice I'm leaving the intake valve in there to kind of keep the compound from going in there. And what we're going to do is take the valve, drop it in here, And we're going to take our hands, and I'm going to go over the other side so you guys can see. We're just going to work that, pick it up, work it. And we're going to keep doing this till we get a nice ring around the valve. I might have to grind a hair off of this thing because I don't think it's sitting right. But that's all it takes. And like the valve wasn't closing all the way, so I'm going to grind a hair and then seat these valves. So I'm going to take it over to my bench grinder. I'll show you this process later when I use the feeler gauge to check the valve lash. Alright, so we get the valve out of there, and we'll clean this up. And once again, it's just a matter of inspection. You want to make sure that you see a very clean ring going around the seat there, and the mating seat on the valve as well. You can see how there's like a light ring going all the way around. It looks really uniform. So that looks pretty good. We're going to do the other side. It's the same process. Another little tip, before you grind your valves, you could take some emery cloth. Okay, here's the side with the grit. I'm going to put the grit side down, slip that over the valve like that, push that down, and what I can do is keep pressure down on the valve and then just kind of spin that paper, that emery cloth, and that'll help clean up the stubborn carbon on the seat for the valve. And it really doesn't take much to do this, and then you'll seat the valve next. I don't know how well you can see that, but it's really shiny on this edge, so that's good. Next step is to take a little parts cleaner, brake cleaner, and clean out all that grit. And I usually blow it out with compressed air too, so take your time, do a good job cleaning that up. Next step is to set the valve lash. The exhaust valve is supposed to be set to 0.010 of an inch. The intake valve should be set to 0.004 of an inch. And you can look that up online for your engine. If I take a feeler gauge and I put it in here, I have an 0.008 feeler gauge. Oop, there they are. And it's not even going in there. The problem is, you see how the valve's picking up? I got to put a hand up top, push down on the valve to make sure it's seated properly. That's what the springs will do. And then I can check it with the feeler gauge. I know it's not fitting in there, so we got to grind a little bit off. I'll show you how to do that. So we're going to use a flat sanding disc, and we're just going to keep this thing spinning. We want to keep the bottom of the stem as flat as we can. And we're only trying to take off a little bit. And now we want to check it. So we were right at 0.005, so we're going to go a little more. Alright, so having some patience, I was able to take it from 0.008 to 0.010. And I put some bolts up top to hold the valve down in the seat, and this is a 10,000 feeler gauge, and you can see it slipping in here nice and easy. It's not getting stuck. That's exactly how you want it. The reason that you have to grind the valves is because when you lap the valves, they seat a little bit lower. So even though the intake was good, I got to do the same process on the intake, because now that I lapped it, it's going to seat a little lower. And you should always lap both. Since you got a part, you might as well do it. So now it's time to put the valves back together. It's a little hard to show on camera, but basically you want to drop the valve in the head from the tops and push it down through the spring, and then on the bottom of the spring is this little keeper. It's a keyhole slot. So what it does is the open side goes on the bottom of the valve stem, and then it kind of locks in place. So it goes on there like that. So there's a big opening, and then it locks in like that, and it'll hold the spring. Alright, so you don't want to forget to oil up your valve stem. So put oil on that, and I'm going to use my valve stem compressor. Makes it so much easier to put these things in. You can do it by hand with some screwdrivers, but it's a pain. And here's how easy it is with the valve spring compressor. You just place the valve in, put it through the spring, and then you work the keeper on, loosen or take the tension off the spring and pull, and that's it. So once you get everything back together, you can rotate over the engine, and you should be able to see, make sure all your valves and springs are working properly. And here's a look at the cylinder. You can see there's a nice hatch pattern on it. It's really in good shape on this unit. Looks good to me. So now we're in the process of putting this back together, and here's the old head gasket. This one's, you know, one of the older ones made out of metal. These are good. The new one that I bought for it is made out of this, like, I don't know, it's almost like a cardboard type material, and it has like a sticky coating on it. These always need to be replaced whenever you pull the head. This old one, this is probably fine. I've reused these in the past, but these new ones, they peel apart when you take them off. But anyhow, this snowblower given to my brother-in-law, so I'm going to give him a brand new head gasket. So we'll put that on there like that and put this back together. So I have all the head bolts in the right spot, and I wire wheeled them, and I also oiled them, just a squirt of oil to get the threads to seat. And then I'm going to take my speed wrench, push down, and go backwards until I hear that click, and then go forward and just run them in. What that'll do is, hearing that click is going to help you not cross thread them. And we're going to look up the torque spec and get this thing seated properly. Okay guys, I got everything back together. I had to screw around a little bit, just taking the head bolts in and out, figure out how all the flanges went on. So if you're working on an engine like this, don't tighten anything down until you get all your covers and flanges and gas tank and muffler on there. So luckily I didn't, but I had to loosen up the bolts and get things underneath. The inch pounds on this guy, I think it's rated at 200. I torqued them to 180 inch pounds, and I put in my compression tester, and we'll quick test the compression on this thing. So we're at 0. If you remember, it was at 64 or so, I think. And I could feel there's pretty good pressure. Oh yeah, almost 140. So we're about 137 or 138. So that's real good compression for this small engine. Still waiting on the carb, so when I get that I should be able to fire it up. What's up, guys? Double Wide 6, and I wanted to thank you guys for giving me the comments down there in the comment section. Last time I did the leak down test video for you, several of you gave a thumbs up to the comment that said that I should do the valve job video. So I went ahead and did that, and if there's ever a video that you want, you got to get down there in that comment section and let me know. Anyhow, I'm going to put a link in this video to some tools that you can use for this job. So we'll spin you over this way, and I'll have several links down in the description. And the reason I put the links in the video is because YouTube's monetization has actually changed so much that it's barely even worth making videos. So I try and make a little extra money through Amazon. And even if you guys don't buy anything but you click on the links, it does help me out, and that's why I put it there. So anyhow, thanks for watching and subscribing, and stay posted for future videos. Take care.